All right. I'm going to turn the subtitles on. Sometimes I do, but I don't see the advantage of the subtitles.
Okay.
So if somebody can find getting the subtitles turned on or even being able to download the subtitles, that would be really great. Because then we could turn some of this stuff into a book or something.
Okay.
Print it on tiny little pieces of paper like they do in Japan and throw it out the window of an airplane or tie it to the feet of a dove. They do that, by the way, in Thailand in other ways. One of them is that there is an entire full-on industry of both clay tablets, old and new, and I sort of all kinds of iconography, the kind that's small enough to carry with one all the time. And it's an entire industry. And even though there's 70 million people in Thailand, I would say that there's at least 700 million, if not 7 billion of these things that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And I've got a few of them here, if you don't mind. I'll show them to you the
Yeah.
best we can do that. Some of them are duplicates, and many of these things have been double, triple, quadruple blessed in various ceremonies and then given to me by Achan Bunmi, who at that time 15 years ago was the most senior Lao monk in the United States. So here's one that looks kind of old,
Okay.
a little trinket. This one, I know the age of it because I bought these, which I've got quite a lot of. And when I was a monk, I would give these things out to people. Okay, this is actually um, Prasangajai and Prasangajao in the Lao and the Cambodian language. Hoi Toi. All right, here's. Oh, don't do that. The floor has slats in it, so if any of them get dropped, and it's quite a handful of them here, maybe I should set them all down so that they don't get. Yeah. Here's one out of jade, and Robert liked that one, so I'll give that one to him when he's down here in a couple of months.
Oh, that's really
He lives
cool.
in, yeah, all kinds of these things. And the clay ones, all right? So there's an entire industry of that here in Thailand. I think that in the Catholic religion they would have something similar to this, except that in Thailand, as you can see, I've got a collection of maybe 30 or 40 of them, and I would say that my collection is probably smaller than most households.
Oh wow.
Uh, Good luck charms and other things, and some of them, like I say, are hundreds of years old and can be inspected that way because of stamps and the fonts that are used over time and other things like that. Though I don't expect any of these to be really ancient, but this one is probably maybe 100 years old here, which is not really old by the standards that these things are judged by. Um, so anyway, oh, and yes, and I had the most of these. This is the smallest version. Look at how tiny this is. Yes, and I used to give those out, but there's very few of them left now. In fact, as I was running out of them, I became stingy. When I had hundreds of them, I'd give everybody one. Oh, yes. Yes, some of them are actually quite old. So, when Bunmi gave me this bag and all of these things. Uh, it was considered especially auspicious by uh, the few monks and people who were in attendance when he gave it. It was like he was giving me the crown jewels of the Laotian culture, and yet I doubt so. I doubt, in fact, I imagine he's got these things by the thousands in a little box that he drags out and gives to people in sometimes ceremonially. Very interesting monk, Bunmi. So, it just so happens that I was thinking about giving a talk to you today on the five aggregates.
Okay.
But since you asked the question about Paticca Samuppada, I'll show you exactly how the five aggregates fit precisely into Paticca Samuppada. And it is the part of Paticca Samuppada that has no self to it. That's the five aggregates. And that once the five aggregates are, let us say, set into motion with kind of a small bang theory, that gives rise to feelings. And if the feelings are ignorant, then it will lead down a path that creates the self. And the self then is subject to suffering. Others of us will say, no, the self is actually the bucket in which suffering is carried. No bucket, no suffering.
Okay.
All right. But the five aggregates in and of themselves have no self. And so let's look at these things from the position of the five aggregates, and then in a way we'll pull them apart to show you exactly how they fit into the Paticca Samuppada.
Okay.
All right. The five aggregates, by the way, is very, very similar to the four foundations of mindfulness, which is what Anapanasati is built upon.
Okay.
All right, and so we practice the Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness. And by fully employing the four foundations of mindfulness, that will lead us through the Eightfold Noble Path into the enlightenment factors, which are actually aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path.
Okay.
All right, so we go from Anapanasati down to the Satipatthana, from the Satipatthana down to the five aggregates, from the five aggregates down to Paticca Samuppada, and that's the details. Now, another way of looking at it is that this is also a description of the second noble truth, the cause of suffering.
Okay.
Because you know the cause of suffering, the third noble truth. What are the three causes of suffering? Lobha, moha, dosa are the
Uh,
three Pali terms. What are they?
is that the pleasure, um, pleasant, unpleasant, and or both, or ambiguity between the two?
All right, that would be the three kinds of feelings. And yes, in a way, you're exactly right. But in the
Okay.
description of the second noble truth, they're described separately or differently in the sense of once they're full
Clinging,
blown.
clinging,
Okay.
aversion, and then ignorance or confusion.
Yes, a jiva, but in fact, not knowing or delusion is the same thing as that kind of feeling, which is a confused feeling. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's so subtle, and so many people don't even understand that it's there when we're confused. But confusion leads to fear
Okay.
when it's unwise. When that confusion is a wise feeling, it becomes curiosity.
Okay.
And you can see how that unknowing, that state of in between, can fall into the kind of trepidation that leads to suffering in the sense of fear anxiety, stress, running away from something that you're so busy running away from that you won't turn around to see what it is that you're running away from.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And many people live their whole lives like that. Almost in the sense that they're sensing dread, but they don't know what the dread is, so they're trying to frantically cover all the bases, and they wind up in a state of anxiety, even to the point of paranoia.
Okay.
All right, that's kind of an extreme case. But if these feelings are wise feelings, then we're taking the ignorance out of it. And so, in fact, the second noble truth of uh, expressed as greed, ill will, and delusion, because we're looking for words that are very strong and therefore very easy to understood. You can also see how those words can be easily unpacked back down to the basic feelings that you were saying, which would be pleasure or a feeling of I like it.
Okay.
But the feeling of I like it is actually a feeling that, if it's ignorance, will become craving. I like it, therefore I want it, is the ignorant statement. Just like
Okay.
uh, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's the kind of mistaken logic that they make. In fact, Descartes should have said, I think, therefore I think I am.
Okay.
Because that's more correct, and that's what people do. We think ourselves into existence
Uh-huh.
through our clinging and our wanting and our desires.
Uh-huh.
But let's go back now to the aggregates and start
Okay.
naming them, and we can see that from the second noble truth of greed, ill will, and delusion, that when we apply that to the Satipatthana, which is in fact the totality of who you are, the totality of who you are is your body, your feelings, your mind, and all of the mind's objects, no matter how subtle or slight, gross or misleading, true, etc. Mental objects plus the mind itself, feeling, and body is the sum total of who you are. So you are, in fact, the second noble truth, especially with this point about feelings. Feelings seem to be the really big issue here because, in fact, the second noble truth is all about those three kinds of feelings: greed, ill will, and ignorance. Mostly ignorant about our ill will and ignorant about our greed, which means ignorant about how we feel. Ignorant about how we feel. Yes, so that paints a picture for us. Now let's look at it from the position of the four foundations of mindfulness and break it down just a little further into the five aggregates.
Okay.
All right. That in fact we're going to recombine the mind and um, the mental objects as a function. Excuse me. As a functional way of looking at it. And now we're going to turn it and look at it from a structural way or a procedural way of looking at it. So that the four foundations of mindfulness, the body, feeling, mind, and mind objects, becomes body, feeling, consciousness, perception, and sankhara. And I'll teach you all about what those five things are. So that if you understand the five aggregates, then you can easily understand the paticca samuppada.
Okay.
All right, so the five aggregates: body, feeling, and now we're looking at it as consciousness and perception and sankhara. Now, actually, there are three kinds of sankhara. One of them has already been mentioned in the form of the body, and there are two other kinds of sankhara that are mental. All right, the bodily sankara is all of the things that the body is capable of doing. For instance, playing the piano, playing the drums, marching in a marching band, playing football, catching, doing Zen swordsmanship, karate, all of the kinds of things that an individual can learn how to do is all what he does learn stored in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So that the Heisman Trophy winner wins that Heisman Trophy because of what he's able to do with his body without even thinking about it. In fact, all he's doing is having his eye on that football, and the body knows what to do otherwise. It's really amazing like that.
Mm-hmm.
An example of that is a singer who is well trained on being able to hit the right notes, because unlike a flute or many other kinds of instruments, holding the right pads down correctly gives you the right note. But with singing, you have to learn how to. So there's a thing that happens in the brain that has to do with what is called perfect pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So that when the singer knows from this note down to that note, he does not have to think about how his voice gets down to that note. It just does it,
Mm-hmm.
and it hits it right on key.
Mm-hmm.
He's not off key. He's not like a child singing. He's got the right key. How does he do that? It's something that's stored in the body. This is what we mean by bodily sankara.
Okay.
Now, at another level, the way that we use our eyes, the way that we look, the way we focus our eyes, the way that we use our body for feeling and sensation. That a lot of people, for instance, because of some training they've had, cannot be snuck up on,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're asleep, which is actually the job of the dog. The dog is not supposed to be caught sleeping no matter what time of day it is. When the stranger comes, the dog should bark,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why? Because he should be attuned to the sound. That's what his job is. So, in that regard, that's also part of the body sankara of how we use the body, how we perceive the body, how we live in the body. This
Mm-hmm.
is all stored um, in the body itself. Basically, the body and the brain are kind of interconnected like that. That
Okay.
in fact a good piano player will say this too, and that is that the fingering that he uses to play a complex piece of music is not stored in the mind; it's stored in the fingers.
Okay.
All right, and that's quite amazing, because this is the place where it looks like that Paticca Samuppada and these five aggregates are different. But what is really done is that the bodily sankara has been taken out of the group of sankara and placed into the body as a unit itself. So the body as a structure, as a functioning organism, etc., like that, all the way up to the self preservation instinct in the reptilian brain, are all part of the body in this regard. Okay? So now let's look at the other kinds of sankara. The other kinds of sankara are twofold: mental. One of them is the um, verbal sankara. And what we mean by verbal sankara is all of your language skills, all your ability to put sentences together, your ability to hold and contain long, complex ideas and thoughts, and all of that kind of stuff, memory, is stored in a kind of a mid-frontal area of the brain that is more associated with the mammalian brain.
Okay.
Because after all, dogs have language.
Okay.
All right. So, um, the other kind of sankara is emotional sankara. The habits that we have about how we feel about things. And
Uh-huh.
this is stored in two areas. One is in the hippocampus and the other is in the cerebellum. All right, the cerebellum is right in the back. It's almost like a nodule that stands up on the back of the brainstem. The
Okay.
hippocampus is deeper inside. It's on top of the amygdala.
Okay.
All right. The reason I'm giving you this information is because you already know what I'm talking about. A lot of students won't.
Okay.
Okay. Um, but the point is that there are two kinds of storage systems that give two different kinds of information. One is how to feel, and then the other one is how to express that feeling. And
Okay.
these are stored as sankharas. It's stored as our memory systems, and it's highly volatile. It's not very good. Not a very good storage system. And so now let's look at the relationship between the sankharas and the rest of the mind. All right. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at is consciousness, bare consciousness. Now, consciousness in Hinduism is thought to be, in fact, the self itself. And in some suttas, monks express that, and the Buddha puts them down and saying, oh no, consciousness is dependently arisen. In fact, consciousness being dependently arisen is exactly the word paticca samuppada, is dependently arisen. Every aspect of paticca samuppada is a dependently arising thing based upon other foundational factors. And one of the most foundational factors are these sankharas, the stuff that's laying over the dust of the past. The
Okay.
habits that we have of feeling, the habits that we have of our language. Go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah. So it's just very basic. So the idea of the five aggregates is just that you're breaking up you as a person into five basic different categories. Is that the basic idea of it?
Except that, yes, that's true, except we're not breaking the self up, we're breaking the reality of the situation up so that we can point out the fact that in that basic reality of the situation, there is no self. The
Okay.
self comes in at a later part of the process.
Okay.
Okay? The self comes in later, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's stay one step at a time. All
So
right, but
okay, but
but
so
you're
the
right. I
idea
shouldn't have corrected that. I should have said yes. It's the self that we're breaking up.
spoiler. Wait, but so you're saying so right now at this second, um my experience could be parsed into five different components, and this is the list of those five components.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm
Yes.
still I'm still not 100% clear what Sankara is.
All
So I
right.
got
Then I'll boil it down to two things. It's your ability to speak a language and understand that language, and it's your ability to remember how to feel so that you feel things automatically without having to figure out how to feel.
so it seems like to me based on the examples you've given, it's kind of like the kind of autopilot sort of. Like
Yeah,
okay.
baby. Yes, exactly so. Exactly so. And we'll see how all of that fits together in just a moment. All right. So
Okay,
let's
I've got other
discuss.
questions, but I'll just wait for you. I can
Yeah.
just ask them after you've gone a little bit farther.
Yes. Let me take down to one point, and then we'll have question answer, and then we'll continue on.
All right.
All right. So consciousness is dependently arisen, and that the Buddha makes the example of consciousness being dependently arisen by using the analogy of a fire. That a grass fire is known by its name, fire is known by its fuel. So a grass fire is the fuel at which the fire burns. And so every time we talk about a fire, we're talking about the fuel of the fire.
Okay.
All right? Whether it's a house fire or a gas fire or a cow dung fire or a log fire is always known by the fuel.
Okay.
Consciousness is also known by its fuel.
Yeah.
Therefore, we will have eye consciousness,
Yeah.
ear consciousness,
Yeah.
nose consciousness, touch consciousness,
Yeah.
because it's known by its fuel.
Yeah.
All
I get
right.
it.
Now, okay, so the eye, when it sees an object, and you know you're seeing an object, that knowing that you see is consciousness itself, bare consciousness, before the eye takes an object.
I don't get that. Could you say that again?
All right, looking and seeing is not the same thing as looking at and
Okay.
labeling.
Okay.
That it almost has the quality of learning how to see without taking an object.
Okay.
All right, and in that regard, what that means is kind of an open vision that is much, much more capable of noticing motion out in the real world than eyes that are wandering and looking at various objects. What you
Okay.
do is you just diffuse your eyes and just kind of take no object at all. So that seeing is merely seeing
Yeah.
without taking an object.
Mm-hmm.
Once we take an object, and in fact, the process of taking the object is now that fifth quality that we haven't talked about yet, and that is perception. We've begun to talk about the body. We've kind of skipped over feelings, other than saying there they are. Now we're talking about consciousness, and when consciousness takes an object, it becomes to perceive that object, which means kind of try to understand what it is.
Okay.
And so perception uses its storage bank. So you could say it's kind of like a laptop, to where the sensory input is taking a file in from the network. All right, and then we open that file. Um, Let us say that it's on the hard drive, is a program that's going to be able to open that file and take it. So we open the file for the program, and now we process that file, and now we display that file on the screen. As we display that file on the screen, what's really going on in the human mind is that there's kind of a screen on the inside of the mind, just like there is on the back of a camera, or to say that the picture that one took with a film camera, the film is not the scene that was seen. So it's a reproduction, an
Okay.
internal representation.
Think I see.
That representation in Pali is known as the Salayatana,
Okay.
because the antenna is already built into the body as an eyeball. The eyeball is part of the body. The being able to see at that level is in the mind.
Okay.
And it
Can I
had to
read?
be perceived in order to be seen. It had to be perceived in order to be seen. So in fact, there's two ways of seeing, just in the English language, regular English language, which means
Mm-hmm.
there's two different kinds of concept or consciousness, which is both those seeings. One is seeing, I see that car, I see that girl, I see that tree, which is actually we're talking about using the eyes. But we're also talking about when I say car, that means that I've seen it on the inside, and how we talk about that is normally through concepts, in the sense of I understand, or oh, I see what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I see what you mean. I see what's going on here. That's that second kind of consciousness, which is the salayatana, the internal representation that was manufactured inside the mind based upon old memories.
Okay.
Okay, now let me give you a really absurd example, because this actually happened to me.
Wait. Just a real fast. So
Okay,
the two types of C. Are you saying that one of those maps on? Those are not. Neither of those are mapping onto perception, or is the second one mapping onto perception?
no, perception manufactured one of them from the other.
Okay.
Perception is the quality of taking what the eye produces and
Yeah.
manufacturing it
Yeah.
in the sense of labeling it, knowing what it is. Oh, I figured out what's going on. That
I,
was due to the process of perception.
okay, so could you say that like perception is almost kind of like building a kind of model of raw input, and then the model itself is the second. So the first
Yes, the
one is
Salayatana is the model that you're building, and the building itself is
the
perception,
perception. Yeah.
and the raw materials
Yeah.
come from the eye, and the plan of what to build and how to build comes out of the Salayatana, out of the Sankara, the old stored plans, the way of doing things.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Good. It's actually quite important that you understand, because this is actually the way the mind works. And when you realize how the mind does work, you'll stop getting that all excited about what you thought you saw, when in fact what you actually saw was something you manufactured in your own brain.
Okay.
That we are the manufacturers of our own reality. We,
Could, could you just correct me? I'm gonna say something and say if I'm messing something up.
okay.
Okay, so there's two. I don't remember the exact words you used, the Pali words, but so there's two types of consciousness. One you said was kind of like the raw input, like I see a car, I see a tree, this kind of thing. And
Uh-huh.
then the second one is, oh, I see what you mean, that kind. So
Mm-hmm.
so those two types of consciousness, perception is the process of turning the first one into the second one.
Okay, I'll agree
Sankara
with that.
Sankara is kind of the script that is used in that process, which is the past condition kind of automatic pre-programmed stuff.
Actually, when you said pre-programmed, you got it.
Okay.
Now all you have to do is just take the pre off of it and talk about it as programmed.
Okay.
There's no such thing as pre-programmed. Programmed is programmed, period.
Okay. Yeah.
It
Okay.
was already it's the program. Programs are always out of the past. They're always pre. There's no such thing as a non-pre program.
Okay. I get it.
So the program itself is actually in the form of stored memories about how we do that. All right, let me give you two quick examples. There was a woman who burned herself to death on the radiator at the insane asylum. Later, they came to understand that, because they looked through their notes and she told them all about what was going on, was is that when she was a child, her father would get drunk. He would come in the house and hurt everyone, and she would hide behind the radiator in order to not get beaten up by her dad. Well, it
Hmm.
just so happens that this time the radiator was hot,
Yeah.
and she didn't have the skills that it took to realize that it was okay, it was more safe to get out from under the radiator.
Hmm.
Now another example. This one's confessional.
Uh-huh.
All right. It had to do with when I was in college, and the college that I went to, we decided, or they already had fiberglass sousaphones. They were very popular back in the 1960s. They were popular because fiberglass sousaphones, it didn't matter what kind of sound they put out. They wanted it big and loud, on key, and lightweight and cheap.
Yeah.
So here I'm tooling down the street in the neighborhood of the music place, where you see people carrying musical instruments all over the place, and here I see a guy carrying a French horn, not made like normal French horns, but made out of this white fiberglass material like a sousaphone would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I became very curious about that. How could it possibly be? I get up close, I find out the guy's carrying a white frisbee and 2 white tennis shoes.
Okay.
You see what that perception did?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I had been either a frisbee player or a runner, I would have not had that. It came from the mind of a tuba player. It
Yeah.
came from the mind who's thinking of white sousaphones with the big white bell, and that's what that frisbee became.
Hmm.
That's delusional.
I played
It's
tuba, by the way.
perceptional. Pardon?
I played tuba for a few years,
Okay.
by the way.
Do you know the difference between tubas and sousaphones and all of that kind of stuff? Yeah, all right. So actually, this is not a tuba, it's a sousaphone that I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Anyway, um, yeah, good German tubas, they strap them on and carry them. But
Yeah.
John designed the wraparound, and they got much more popular in the United States than they ever got in Europe.
Uh-huh.
So, enough of tuba history. um, so, those are two examples of where the perception is so messed up that it gives erroneous results.
Mm-hmm.
The erroneous result was I see a fiberglass French horn. No, I did not. Only in my mind did I see a fiberglass French horn.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So much for the reliability of eyewitnesses and eyewitness testimony. And we've known that in court for years and
Yeah.
years that eyewitness testimony is not reliable
Yeah.
because of the memory base and the way that we look at things, etc., like that, and we miss all kinds of stuff. I have known people back in the day when they would intentionally paint their car red on one side and green on the other so that they, no matter what happened in court, he could get out of it because the witnesses couldn't agree on what color the car was.
Yeah.
Making a fundamental mistake that, well, it could have been painted intentionally that way.
Yeah.
So here's the point now. We've got a system that works.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is that it has the body as the base and all of these sankaras built together so that you've got a human system going, and now the eye opens and it sees something. The eye attaches to that as an object, and then perception starts up, and the realization is there's a Colt 45 automatic weapon in my face or something ridiculous like that. And it's a big wake-up call. We have a lot of feelings that happen at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
All right? So what that means is that if we had been a child, the perception would have been that it was a fake weapon because our children are playing.
Yeah.
If you're a gangster and you see it, you got a completely different point of view. I'm about to die.
Yeah.
All right. If a store clerk sees it, his thoughts is, I'm about to get robbed.
Mm-hmm.
All with different perceptions.
Where does context fit into this? So
That the context is, in fact, part of the sankara.
okay.
By the
So
time the context, by the time the sankara is in use, it's already in use as this is.
gotcha. So part of the sankara might be different when I'm at the store versus at home in terms of how I perceive things because that's just part of the programming.
Exactly.
Okay.
Precisely so. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
All right. Another example is the guy goes into the to the 7-Eleven and he sees what for him is an attractive girl there behind the counter. He leaves the store, he gets into the car, and he's still thinking about her. But now, what we mean by thinking about her is he's still dwelling upon the Salayatana he manufactured. The real girl is not only in the store, but he knows nothing of the girl other than what he's making up.
Sorry, so the Salyatama, that is consciousness too? That is the second
That
type
is
of...
the second kind of consciousness. It's the internal eye, so to speak. It's what we see as a memory that is now also becoming a sankhara, to be brought up over and over and over and over and over again as we get more and more lusty and attached to an internal image of a woman we know nothing about.
Okay, so the model gets built. That is the consciousness too. And then because of memory, I guess, at some point it gets turned into Sankara for the future.
Yes, it
Okay.
gets stored.
Okay. And that's just
Not
memory,
no,
right?
that's not true. Sometimes it gets stored.
Okay.
And the more likelihood that it impacted us, the more likely it is to get stored.
Okay.
So I'm adding a new concept now, impact.
Okay.
All
Is
right.
that different from... That's not feelings though.
No, but the impact is what gives rise to feelings. In the
Okay.
Pali language, it's called pasa. In English, we normally refer to it as contact. When that salayatana is manufactured, constructed in the mind, sometimes that salayatana is really heavy
Yeah.
and drops with a big thud, and it really contacts us. Many salayatanas are really, really lightweight and don't have much impact.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that impact, that's the question. That's the point of contact. That's pasa. That is a key point for Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and for the Buddha, because they say that if you are mindful, if you have sati, if you have wisdom at the point of contact, then how you feel will have knowledge. And because you have knowledge over what you feel, you begin to have control over how you feel at that point of contact where the salayatana, your own imagination, hit you.
Okay.
And your imagination was manufactured with a process that we called perception.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you can see the word perception in there. The word sep in the word perception is actually seeing. It's
Okay.
much more the Greek word, okay? But you can see the word seeing. Spectrum, that's the word, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You know the word spectrum,
Yeah.
okay? Also, the word is inspection.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the word is spectacles.
Or spectator.
Spectator, exactly, okay. That's where that word is coming from, but now it's an internal seeing,
Okay.
all right? It's an illusion, it's a delusion, it's a shadow, it's not real.
Uh-huh.
It was something that we perceived, it was something that we made up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what we make up that hurts. We manufacture our own suffering. When you recognize that, it's like, oh, well, now I know how to get out of suffering. It's because I just stop making the damn stuff.
Yeah. So the step in which we're manufacturing the suffering is the perception step. Is that right?
It's manufactured at the perception step, but it really rots and goes downhill from there.
Uh-huh.
So the Buddha would actually go so far as to recommend that the highest peace that a Buddha can have will be at the point of allowing seeing to be merely seeing. We can think of that in our language as not taking an object. The hearing is merely the heard, it's not the listened to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just kind of cutting it off there, basically.
But we're aware of it. That's the entire difference. It's not that we're unconscious or semi-conscious to it. We're actually fully conscious to it. But
Yeah,
we're
isn't
fully
this what?
conscious to everything when we're not taking anything as an object. What
Yeah.
makes us semi-conscious is by taking an object and then processing it.
Hmm.
And while we're processing that image to make it an internal image so that we can figure out what to contact and how to feel about it, etc., while all of that's going on, we're not watching anymore.
Uh-huh.
We're not seeing anymore.
Yeah.
So in order to stop the subconscious part is by stop the processing so that we
Hmm.
become fully conscious more and more of the time to be here now.
Okay.
Isn't that amazing? That's how the Buddha figured all of this stuff out. All right. So this now the next part to look at is the fact that you are not the body. You are not the feelings. You are not consciousness itself. You are not the act of perception, and you're not all of your old stored memories.
Hmm.
You're not any of those things. You're something else. But your old
Yeah.
stored memories, you're not any of that.
Yeah.
But we kind of think we are when we're stuck thinking about the past. When we're wallowing in the past, when we're thinking in the past, then we begin to believe that there's a self who did all of that stuff in the past. So, in a way, the self only exists in the past. The same can be said for the future. But in the present moment, the self doesn't exist. And in this present moment, what we have is merely these five aggregates
Yeah.
operating together. But once the contact happens, once the salayatana has an effect, then feelings arise.
Is the Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Once once the perception has manufactured the image,
Hmm.
all right. Now we're into let us say the creation of the self. But
Hmm.
perception and sankhara and consciousness and body and the feeling network system, all of that stuff has no self to it. The body is merely the body. You are
No,
not the body.
yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
you are feelings, but you are not the feelings. In fact, you if you were the feelings, then you could control your feelings and you'd feel exactly the way that you want to. Showing that you cannot control your feelings is proof enough that you are not your feelings. Next
hmm.
point, when you learn to control your feelings, is because you already recognize you are not the feelings. They're an animal to be tamed.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get the point for sure. Um,
All right.
okay, so
Consciousness is also not you. You are not. Now, the Hindus think so. They think that it's consciousness that runs in circles around this place and that place. But think about you being in heaven, and now you've got some sort of ephemeral body. You've got eyes, but they're not real eyes.
yeah.
They look at
Yeah.
everything as kind of a magical way of looking at it, but in fact, without eyes, you can't look.
Yeah.
So you are not consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I get it, everything, I think. I have a couple questions.
All right. Okay, well, let
So,
me finish with this and then you can
okay.
ask the questions. All right. You are not consciousness because many times you are not conscious. And when you're not conscious, how could you be if you and consciousness were the same thing? In fact, because you're not conscious all the time, that kind of proves that you're not you all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard for us to recognize. Yeah, while I'm asleep, I'm not me at all. I'm something else. I have to become conscious in order to become me, and that consciousness happens through the process of perception. But the processing itself of perception is also not me.
Yeah.
All right. This is where Nagarjuna and Melanda were talking. This happened about the around the, let us say 2,000 years ago, around that time. And that one was the wanderer and the other one was the king. And so the king Nalanda asked about this idea. Yeah. And he says, "Oh, king, sir, do you mind? Let me show you this. Is this the chariot?" And he says, "Yes." He says, "Will you please step off the chariot?" And then he says, "If you don't mind, I would like to do a few things with it, and I need your help." And so he got all the men to take the chariot apart and put the two wheels on one place and put the rib post on another and the basket on another place, and etc. like that, and had the chariot and down to about 10 paces. And then he said to the king, "Oh, king, where is the chariot?
Mm-hmm.
Where is the chariot?" Which what he was really asking is, where are you when we take you apart and each piece is not the chariot? No piece of that chariot is the chariot. There is no chariot. The chariot at best, and now we understand it in modern language as a general system theory, where we begin to understand that the whole is actually greater than the sum of the parts.
Mm-hmm.
So the self must be something else on top of that which actually exists. Because it's not consciousness, it's not perception. What it is buried in the feelings, and it's buried when the feelings go wrong. And the
Mm-hmm.
feelings go wrong when perception goes wrong, when our memories are wrong, when things get screwed up inside, and we think we know something when in fact we don't.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but the cure is either one of two places. One is to stop perceiving and live a life, or at least much of the time of the life, the way that the Buddha would, which would be not perceiving, just accepting the reality as it comes in. And we find out that, wow, and Buzz does it. There is so much happening all at once. We think that nothing is happening or very little is happening because we take something as an object and process that. And while we're processing that, we're not paying attention to the 10,000 things that are also happening.
Mm-hmm.
But when we stop with the perception, then the mind becomes expanded, opened. You can do that with your eyes by not taking any particular object, or begin to widen your perception so that you can see things at the very corners of the eyes. You
Mm-hmm.
can begin to feel the body and feel what the body is feeling, almost as if it were an antenna that's receiving information at a level that we don't normally pay attention to.
Uh-huh.
The vibrations, the vibes. All right, and so this is the way we begin to open up. That's the best place to do it. The second best place to do it, the place where I recommend that you do it as a student, is at that point of contact. Once the Salayatana has arisen, which is our own manufactured idea, or our labeling, or whatever word that you want to use. But now it's fully on the inside, and that's what contacts the feelings.
Okay.
And if we can be wise at that time when the feelings arise, then we'll be wise to how we feel.
Okay. Can I ask some
And
questions?
yes, now it's time to ask the questions. You are not the Salayatana, nor are you any of the five aggregates. That's the thing to understand. You are, in fact, the product of feelings gone wrong.
Okay. So when you talk about somebody's personality, you're talking about Sankara at that point, is that right?
Mostly, yes.
Okay. Um on so body is the first of the aggregates. Is this so like so we had said before, like things come in through the eyes. So is that part of the body that we're considering then? The eyes then would be part of like one of the sense doors that actually starts into the
Right.
machine. Okay.
Exactly. And so,
Gotcha.
and the Pali word for the for that, the senses themselves are the atana, and
Okay.
there are six of them.
Yeah, like the last one is thought.
Mind.
Last, yeah, thoughts or something like that, right?
Yeah, the mind itself can generate stuff. It can be. We could just dredge stuff right out of Sankara and reprocess it.
Uh-huh. Okay. Um, okay, yeah. So I know I asked this and I'm still not entirely clear on. So when you say feelings, is this just pleasant, unpleasant, or ambiguity? Is that the
Not. It's not ambiguity. It's
the
confusion.
confusion? Okay.
Ambiguity is easy to handle. Confusion is not. Confusion is hard to handle because we want to resolve it to either liking or not liking. We're not satisfied.
Okay.
Ambiguity is okay. That's not a feeling.
Okay. So stuff comes in through the body through one of the sense doors, right? Except the sixth sense door, which I guess, like you said, is coming straight from Sankara, but all the other ones they're coming from the body, right? And then
Exactly.
okay,
Well,
so
even that sixth sense one can come from the body. It depends upon the level of consciousness and subconsciousness and all of that kind of stuff.
okay,
It's a little complicated in there, and I thought I would add that level of complexity to it for no reason at all.
okay, but for instance, right now we're talking, and so the ear right now, body, right?
Hmm.
And then so then this by coming in my ear is then it's so then I have kind of ear consciousness or hearing consciousness. It's kind of creating consciousness by coming into my ear, right? It's kind of
Hmm.
okay. So that's consciousness one. And then perception in this case, I guess my mind is then making it into words. That might be an example of a kind of model that it's making, right? That is then it's making meaning out of the sounds. And so then that could be an example of consciousness too. Obviously, there's different levels that one can talk about there, but just in terms of meaning of the words that I'm hearing. So that's so the perception is turning that into consciousness too. And then the feeling and that it does that using the Sankara, which is my knowledge of language and this kind of practice that I've had speaking and hearing and this kind of thing in the past.
Hmm.
And then the kind of yeah, the pleasant, unpleasant, or confusion is sort of the way that those models interact. The way that I'm trying to use the word other than feeling, the way that this system interacts with that model as either liking it or not liking it or being confused by that model. Is that accurate?
Yes, but now it's a good idea to go back up the chain, back up to the cause of suffering,
Uh huh.
and at the level of the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, now we're beginning to see how that stuff actually operates.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this suffering come from? The most important quality is that it comes out of ignorance because we are, let us say, these feelings come up off of an automatic pilot or out of programming that we were not aware of, nor the results of it. And that the major mistake that we were making were that we were thinking that the feelings that we were having were based upon what was happening on the outside world, where in fact, no, the feelings that we were having are based upon this internal manufactured thing that I just created.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Um, So, okay, so then we're at feelings, and I guess from where we're talking about, then that can then the okay. So where do emotions come in? Is that so? I
The
guess what I'm
emotions are actually manifestations of suffering.
okay, but that's not one of the five aggregates.
No, no, not at all. No, that's on the other side of the coin. We're
Okay,
only looking at the heads. Now we're going to have to look at the tail side of the coin. What happens after feelings arise?
okay,
That's where all the grasping and clinging and wanting and desire and all of that comes from,
I
based
see.
upon the feelings that we had of liking, not liking, or confused. And the feelings that we had were based upon a self manufactured TV skit.
Okay, all
And
right.
so by seeing this process, we begin to see, wait a minute, that means in fact the self is something that gets manufactured on a recurring level. And when it gets manufactured on a recurring level, it gives the delusion that it's been there all along. Where in fact it arises and passes away and arises and passes away. And the same thing is with consciousness. We think when we're conscious that we're conscious all the time, but when we're not conscious, we don't know we're not conscious.
Yeah.
All right, which actually in both these cases, both in fact all three, there's three of them. The two kinds of consciousness, the actual seeing the object, and then the seeing it internally, and then at the level of feeling, we're manufacturing these things, and none of them are us. We are not any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
We're not any of the constituent components, but when those constituent components operate, and operate in fact in a wrong or misguided way, that's when feelings arise. And the feelings, if they're ignorant, here's how it goes. With feelings, let's look at one feeling at a time. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I like it, therefore I want it. That's the normal ignorance.
Okay.
Why? Because now we're operating at just I like it level, and we're not doing much other processing. This is the point in time to tell the good old story about Achan Samedo and Achan Cha, to where they were at a ceremony together, probably a Keten ceremony, where a lot of young Thai women are there looking for husbands coming out of the Sangha. And Achan Cha leans over and asks Achan Samedo, who wasn't an Achan at that time, and says, "What do you think? Isn't this nice?" And Samedo answered it correctly according to Paticca Samuppada. I like it, but I don't want any of it.
Okay.
Okay? That's the trick, is that when these feelings arise, I like it, but I don't want it, is wise. I like it and therefore I want it. That's the old standard ignorance. And when we want something, then we begin to lust after it. The more we want it, the more we think about it, and that's the buildup of emotion.
So it seems like you're talking about three separate kind of parts that it can get cut. The first is that you said that the Buddha would normally be cutting it basically at the perception level, in which there wouldn't
Before
be this perception.
pre-perception level.
Yeah, there wouldn't be this
At the,
perceptual processing. And so
exactly.
consciousness too basically wouldn't typically exist for a lot of things. So then it wouldn't even go on to feelings and all this. So presumably that's tough. And so then you recommended to me to stop it after before feelings. So after consciousness
At the
too.
point of contact.
Yeah,
The
at the point
feeling
of
at once the salayatana
yeah.
Okay, that would be the second place to do it. Is to not, or when Salayatana is created, you recognize that this is in fact Salayatana. I'm manufacturing this. No big deal. This is only my own creation, except that there's no me. It's just this is a creation of the mind.
So
But if that package in fact impacts us, then that impact, we should have mindfulness there, sati, wisdom at the point of contact, so that because once you're contacted, you have no control over those feelings arising, but you do have control over them as they arise, when they arise, and after they arise, what you're going to do with them, but only if you know them.
okay, so so ideally, what I should be trying to do is stopping the link between the Salyatama consciousness too. I have to say they all get confused, and feelings, and that all obviously has to come down to Sankara, right? So the idea is to change conditioning such that there isn't an automatic link between the consciousness too and the feelings. Is that
You
correct?
can say it that way. Yes, that would be good enough to say it that way. But there's many different ways of saying it. The easy one would be to say, know what you're feeling.
Uh-huh.
Know your feelings as they arise. That would be the easy way of saying it. Know what you're feeling. Know your feelings before you can voice them.
Okay, but then the feelings are still arising then. I thought we
They're
were
still
saying that.
arising.
Okay. So
They
I thought we were
start
trying to.
instantly, but then they arise sometimes within one sentence. You can go from what is that into full blown anger within one or two sentences.
Okay, what I'm confused about is. Okay, so I thought that the idea was to stop the conceptualization before the feelings, after consciousness too, but before the feelings. But you're saying the feelings are going to arise. Is that
Depending upon the contact. If you
okay?
drop an anvil on your foot, you're going to have a certain feeling. If you drop a 1 pound ball on it, you're going to have a different feeling. If you drop a feather on it, it's going to be a different feeling. So that's the amount of contact has a lot to do with what feelings arise.
So at some point, I can reduce the amount of feelings that arise, and I should try to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, but now let's look at it from this angle here. As a student progresses, what they're going to do is back up earlier and earlier and earlier in the process.
Yeah, that makes yeah. So the example that you gave of those two achans talking, that would have been a next farther step because you had said that one said to the other, I like it, but I don't want it. So that is after feeling. So that's a step later in the line, down the line.
E- right. That's, well,
Okay.
actually, no, that is that point of contact. I like it. I see I like it. But already
Okay.
wisdom is there at that point.
Okay.
Because if there's ignorance at that point, then I like it means also I want it,
Okay.
which would be the next step down the line. In the Pali, it would go from Pasa, which is contact, Vedana, which is feeling. The next one is Upadana, and then Tanha.
Uh-huh.
Upadana means that I want to take it, and Tanha means full on ownership. That's the beginning of, or that's actually the creation process of the self, which is known as Bhavana and Jati. And from Jati goes Dukkha. So Dukkha is manufactured in the mind through a process that starts with the eye, goes to perception, uses the Sankara to create an image. That image then impacts us, gives rise to feelings. The feelings then ignorantly will want it, and from the wanting of it, the needing it, the gotta have it, etc., and then all of the rest. that goes from the feeling of I gotta have it.
And that's when you're talking about the other side of the coin. That's post feeling stuff.
Exactly. And in fact, I've given all of them to you. That's the 12 steps of dependent origination. But one can understand the 12 steps of origination by understanding that it comes in two halves, and
Mm-hmm.
that the midpoint between them is when feelings arise. To recognize that all of the stuff that's already there as a base is not self. Self is created in this process,
Uh-huh.
and it's created after feelings arise.
Um, I know that I'm harping on it, but I'm still confused by a subtle point. So, so when you're using the word contact, that word is when you're saying that it's the contact between consciousness to and feelings, right? It's when feelings are getting activated. Is that
Right. It's whatever it is that contacts you that gives rise to feelings, which is something that you perceived, something that you manufactured, and that we call that salayatana,
okay?
but it can also be referred to as internal sense organ or internal sense perception, but
Okay.
it's actually mental.
So the contact itself isn't we're not removing the contact from happening. Is that right? We're just being aware when it happens so that it doesn't cause these downstream effects.
For the beginner, that's correct. As I
Okay.
said, the more skilled you become, then the sooner in the process you can, uh, um, through sati, bring things to a stop.
So that would be equanimity then, would be even severing it a step earlier, would be stopping the contact from happening. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So that in that regard, you could say nothing gets through.
Yeah.
And I like that. Nothing gets through.
Yeah.
Because the getting to is just getting to the consciousness. It's getting through is through the perception into the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
When we're getting through that's that process of perception, salayatana, pasa, contact, and vedana.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So so
Now, let
okay,
me
so
say this before you get too much
okay.
into every detail.
Okay.
There are several places in the suttas, including the Dinga Nikaya number 15 is probably the most famous, is where Ananda is telling the Buddha that he actually understands Paticca Samuppada. But the Buddha is already not just knowing, but is kind of frustrated with the fact that Ananda really hasn't caught on to the concept of no self. He still has magical beliefs. In a way, you could say that he still plays a subtle game of victim, and the Buddha can see it.
Okay.
All right. So if you really understand Paticca Samuppada, what that means is that you can see how you are a victim because the victimhood is stored in Sankara, and that you do not have to be a victim.
Mm-hmm.
At that point of contact, when you see the way that you feel, you say, wait a minute, I'm not going to feel that way. I'm not going to feel the feelings of a victim. I can change my feelings. I can add a new ingredient and reprocess.
Okay. Yeah, so something comes up, the contact happens, which means that feelings arise. There might not be the feelings that you want. So then you're consciously trying to reprogram Sankara at that point so that if it happens again, the same feelings don't come up a second time.
Well, let us not just in one or two. It may take 10 or 20
Okay. Yeah,
because
yeah.
these habits go pretty deep.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
But
sense
every
to me.
time you can catch it and interrupt it, that's adding new new pathways, new neural programming into the mix.
Yeah.
that perception actually creates new neural pathways.
Yeah. So, okay, so I get all this. So up to feelings, you said starting the other side of the coin, you used a couple words I wasn't familiar with. So, feelings, and then I'm guessing tanha is the same thing as craving, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
I gotta have it.
Yeah.
I want it, I want it, I want it, I gotta have it.
And at what point does emotion come into this?
They're building right now in this process that we're talking about. I want it, I gotta have it. I gotta have it is an emotion.
So craving comes directly after feelings, is that right?
Well, when we use words like craving, it sounds like that we're stuck in 1840.
Okay.
And not only that, but we're stuck on the front pew of the Baptist church in 1840. We
Okay.
don't need that kind of language. The modern, why? Because craving sounds degenerate. Craving sounds like something that, Runsfield, the guy who was in under the thumb of Dracula, he was the one who was. No, let us not use craving. Let's just say I want it
Okay.
because it's that subtle. It does not have to get to the level of craving.
Okay. All right. So,
But
okay.
you
So,
do know that Buddhism, we like strong words so that people know what we're talking about. So craving is not a bad word to use, but it does rob us of the sophistication of the peeling process.
okay, but I want to have it. That's an example of tanha.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, let
Okay.
us think it this way. You go to the showroom and you see a car, and on the way home, you're thinking about that car.
Yeah.
That's I want it.
Uh-huh.
Going back to the dealership and signing the paper, that's craving. That's I gotta have it.
Okay.
And by signing that piece of paper, you're becoming the owner, and therefore self has arisen, already arisen. Anytime you sign your name, recognize that you're owning something, you're identifying with something, that you've created a self whenever you sign something. I'm always aware of that. I don't sign things often. So it's
Okay.
to me, it's like when I sign things, I do it under oath at the embassy. That's about the only time I ever sign anything.
Okay, so I want it, and then what comes after that? What comes after the
I
tanha?
gotta have it. I wanted is the trip on. So you saw the car in the showroom. I saw it. I liked it. Now
Okay.
driving away from it, we're thinking about that car. I want it. Now we go back to the showroom and we buy it. That's I gotta have it. That's actually the craving. I want it. I gotta have it.
So are both of those both tanha, or is only the first one tanha?
Upadana.
Okay.
Upadana is I want it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, the word dana is the word that we have in English is the word donation
Yeah.
or don or boon. Okay, so dana, donation, donate. All of those words are the same word. So upadana is the quality of taking. All right. Another place that that word is used is in the precepts. Uh, panatipata. Atenadana. Atenadana means receiving something that was not given. Atena means not given, but receiving or taking. That's the word donation. So upadana means taking it by force or wanting it. It's a
Uh-huh.
mental position. where tanha is that full-blown, uh, by now it's emotional, by now it's painful, by now it's a gut feeling. Let us say by now for the young boy who is in love, now it's called love sickness, where every time he thinks about the girl, the whole pit of his stomach starts to rot away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been there, you've done that. So that's the full-blown version of it, is I want it so bad that I can taste it. That's another expression of tanha. Gotta have it.
Okay, and between those two is another point in which it could be severed.
Exactly so. That's especially true when it's ill will, when people are fighting. Husband and wife are fighting together, and all of a sudden one or the other of them recognizes that they've just gone too far. I said the wrong thing. So the husband will, in a huff, go slam the door and walk off. The argument is finished. Why? Because either he or his wife recognizing this has gone too much. Enough of this. Let's get out.
Uh-huh.
All right. That was a very wise thing to do, because if he hadn't, he'd have probably hit her next.
Okay.
And then if he hadn't seen that he'd gone too far, he might kill her. Okay, so we can wake up any time along the way. The question is, how soon can we wake up? The answer is a really good place to practice is this point where we begin to have feelings, so that we know when we feel something, we know what we feel, rather than letting it get full blown into emotion.
So after contact, but before upadana.
At the point of feeling, or actually, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it at the point of contact, that once you've made that mental image that so disturbs you,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's an example. Kitty, 6 years old, she's actually doing quite a lot of growing. I'm really impressed with what she's doing, but still sometimes she gets angry and throws a tantrum. All right. At the age of 5 or 6, when a child throws a tantrum, normally the parent don't like it, especially if it's in public.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't know what to do with the kid, but they really don't like it. Because they don't like it, they're behaving in a way that the child picks up. They don't like it.
Yeah.
And if it's at home, the kid's in real danger of getting hit.
Okay.
Because parents don't like little kids yelling. All right. So now that you're in that position of seeing that this kid is yelling and you don't like it, and on top of that, it's your kid and you feel responsible. So it's almost like that when you see that kid yelling and crying, it's you yelling and crying, and you want you to shut up.
Okay.
Because you don't like it. You really don't like it. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about, and this is even before you've opened your mouth. And in fact, this is only about 1 or 2 seconds in.
Uh-huh.
This is not going on and on and on. This is the first thing that happens, is you do not like that crying child.
Yeah.
So now that you recognize that you don't like it, can in fact you keep your mouth shut long enough to take a deep breath and do a little bit of anapanasati?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can you find some joy? Because handling this crying child with joy is going to be a whole lot more beneficial to everybody than joining the child in their misery by you becoming miserable also.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an example of, at the point of contact, when you feel the feelings arise and you don't like it. But now let's take the little child, a 6-year-old child, out of the picture and bring in anything that you don't like.
Yeah.
And recognize that, and when you recognize that you don't like something, now is exactly the time to do some anapanasati. Be wise at this point of contact. Recognize something is happening that you don't like, and that if
Uh-huh.
you let it run, you might run into anger, sadness, You might run down to the police station and lodge a complaint. You might go to the priest. Who knows what you'll do in ignorance
Mm-hmm.
because we don't like something. But if we do it wisely, then we can figure out, wait a minute, I don't have to react to this at all. In fact, this is something that I've manufactured in my own mind. The 6-year-old crying is just a 6-year-old crying. All of the crying that I don't like is happening inside my own mind.
Excuse me. Okay. No, this makes sense to me. Um, what happens? What happens after Tanha?
After Tanha is, here's where Paticca Samuppada kind of takes an S curve or a bend because things are happening simultaneously. And if we look to see if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, then we lose the beauty of 1 and 3 are together and 2 and 4 are kind of together.
Okay.
And when you recognize, oh, these things are happening simultaneously, then you recognize that the full blown tanha is also the full blown self. I've got to have it.
Uh-huh.
Reaching and grasping are two other words that are using. The reaching for is kind of like the becoming of the grasping.
Upadana is the reaching, or is this
Mm-hmm.
okay?
That's
Then
the reaching. And
the
then the
grasping is the
tanha is the
tanha.
grasping. That's signing the bottom line or signing the deal. All
Okay.
right. While you're grasping or while you're reaching, while you want it, at that same time, the birth of the self is being developed, which is called bhava, bhavana, which is development. We use it, in fact, the same word for skill development, but in this case, it's the development of the self.
Uh-huh.
And then the birth of the self is the actual full on grasping, in the sense that it takes an owner to have ownership.
Okay.
So, what we're doing is we're creating an owner
At the point of Upadana,
at the point of having something to own.
and that happens at Upadana, right?
Upadana,
Okay.
exactly. And also jati, which is
Jati.
longly translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi and others as rebirth. It's not rebirth, it's just another birth of the self.
Okay. Okay. So the
Another way of saying it's the birth of selfishness. Don't look
so
at itself as an object because it's not an object, it's a concept. And so a concept would be better described as selfishness. So there is no self, but there is selfishness, and the selfishness is the owner of whatever it is that you want to own.
okay. No, I understand that. So the three. So you're saying So the birth of the self happens at the same time as Upadana, and then
They work
subsequently.
together. They work together in a way that it's not necessary to try to pin down a sequence of events that
Yeah,
works at all times.
I see. But then,
Rather, it's more important for you to understand because, in fact, what I intend for you to do with all of this is sit down on your cushion and watch your own mind work and
hmm
figure out how it actually works. And you may need to listen to this tape a couple of times so that when you realize, when you sit down and start watching the mind, you can recognize, oh, yeah, that's right. I create a self because of ignorant feelings, because I want things.
hmm
In fact, we even look at it like that. It's I want, I gotta have, I own.
yeah,
Because words like want and own don't have any meaning unless they've got an owner. So it's the creation of the selfishness, is the creation of that ownership.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So
And so in
after
that
the
regard, there never was a self and there never will be. We use the word self as a noun, but in fact it's not a noun at all. It's a concept. It's a creation of the mind. It's therefore much better labeled as selfishness rather than self, not a noun. That if it were a noun, then it would be someplace in the aggregates down there where nouns actually exist.
Mhm.
All of this is up in the level of feelings.
So this whole sort of chain of events, whether or not it gets severed or not, whether it gets severed or not, is entirely determined by Sankara. Is that right?
Actually, in a way, you could say that. And in fact, in a way, that if you have a child who has had a traumatic childhood, it may be very difficult for them to get over some of this stuff. But let us say a little kid like the Dalai Lama, the way that he was raised on this stuff. He knows exactly what his mind is capable of.
Uh-huh.
So, in fact, the Sankaras do have a tremendous, tremendous effect upon um, how we practice.
And if we practice and we improve it, that's just part of Sankara, right? I mean, that's
It will be, yes. But now we're substituting new, useful, beneficial, excellent, noble, high quality habits for low class, bad feeling habits.
yeah. So there's the I want it, which happens simultaneous to the birth of the self. And then after that is I've got to have it. Is there anything after that?
Well, yes. Once you get it, you're going to lose it. Everything is temporary. Anything you attach to is going to cause suffering eventually. Even if you buy a new car, you're going to have to maintain that car. You're not going to, you might like looking at the car, but you don't like making the payments on it. And when it gets its first scratch, you're going to hate it.
Uh-huh.
If not the whole car, at least the scratch.
Yeah.
All right, so there's the suffering. Anytime we own something, anytime that we attach to it, there's going to be suffering.
Uh-oh. All right, saved it.
That's why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has the statement, and I know what sutta it comes from. Nothing is worth clinging to as I, me, or mine.
Uh-huh.
Nothing is worth clinging to, which means nothing is worth holding on to. And another way of looking at that is nothing is worth identifying with. For instance, identifying with a political party in the United States is a rough ride right now. It's a roller coaster. If you're a Democrat, you suffer. And if you're a Republican, you suffer. Why? Because attaching to something means that you are that thing, and so when it goes up, you go up, and when it goes down, you go down too. The best thing to do is to get off of that roller coaster of identification with things.
So after Tanha, it's Dukkha. That's the last step in the process.
Exactly right. Or with Tanha, we also have the birth jati, and from jati, the full-blown self is there to suffer,
Okay.
and the self was developed, and it was developed while the Tanha was being developed out of Upadana.
Mm-hmm.
So the grasping is the beginning of the self. The actual full-on ownership is the selfishness. It's mine. It belongs to me.
Yeah. Got it.
And this is what gives us ordinary right view. But when we come out of ordinary right view and come out of selfishness, we begin to see things from a higher perspective, a more noble perspective, a non selfish perspective.
The connection is poor right now. I don't know if it is on your end, but the sound quality is bad.
All right. Well, I'm not sure. I think that we're coming to a close on this talk, though.
Mm-hmm.
So let's leave that there, and we'll pick up on this next time.
Sounds
But
good.
the important thing that I want to repeat is that the entire process of the mind and how it works is Paticca Samuppada in detail, but that the physical components of that are what's called the five aggregates, and there is no self in there anywhere. The whatever there is the self is created through a process. And with wisdom, we don't create that self.
Uh,
Leaving it leaving it with tomatoes point, I like it, but I don't want it.
okay. Quick question.
Yes.
After so after feelings arise, we're still in the five aggregates. Then after that, there's a few more things that happen before dukkha. Would those things be kind of a playing off between perception and consciousness again and again that makes each of those subsequent steps?
That's what gives rise to the idea that this is a circle. And in fact, it's really not. It's just one thing after another. But every time it goes, it gets built up deeper and deeper. Uh, but you can think of it as, yeah, that because in fact, that's what hindrance is all about, is just the perceptual part of the mind just spinning.
Okay. No, I get it. It makes sense to me. I like this stuff. It's fun.
It is. And the best part about it is that we begin to say, "Oh yeah, now I understand what's going on." Now, I mean, this is actually the answer to what's it all about.
Seems like it might take a little bit of practice.
It does.
I've been doing the bell thing still. I'm getting better at it. I'm getting better at the hand stuff. Um yeah, I'll let you know next time if I make more
Excellent. We can
progress before then.
we can talk about practice next time, but today was definitely a theory day,
Yeah.
and there's
Sound
no self in there anywhere. That's the important point to take away from this. Is there is no self as a noun, but there is selfishness as a pollutant.
yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, obviously it's one of those things that intellectually that makes perfect sense, but
Exactly. So now begin to see it.
yeah.
Now I've given you what to go look for. Now it's up to you to see it.
Yeah.
And I know what's going to happen when you do.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll see you later, Dan.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye bye.